Welcome. I'm Maria LeRose, and I am being joined by Dr. Kimberly Schonert-Reichel. We are at the Garrison Institute, and we're taking part in a 3-day gathering that's focusing on mindfulness in education, and it's actually called Advancing the Science and Practice of Contemplative Teaching and Learning. It's a mouthful, but Kim, what is it really about?
Well, this is really one of the first initiatives of the Educational Leadership Council of the Garrison Institute in bringing together at a public level all different types of individuals from schools, administrators, clinicians, all interested in how can you advance the science and practice of contemplative education, really focused on kindergarten through 12th grade, although there's a number of different people from university settings. But really this event is quite a large one, and we're very pleased with the number of people who have come. It's sold out. So it really tells us something about the interest in this area.
And we'll get to that in a minute. What does it tell us about them? But first we should probably set some context that you've been in the business of schools, being around schools, bringing social and emotional learning programs to schools for years. So you have a sense of the history of mindfulness in that context.
Yeah, and it's really beginning to emerge. So I want to say I didn't really come into this field until about 2005, but I had spent the previous decade really looking at the whole idea of promoting children's social and emotional well-being in school settings, and that has always been a focus of education, but it really in this past decade has really emerged as the science and has really supporting that idea. If you attend to children's social and emotional development, you not only promote their well-being, but you actually increase their academic achievement. So there's been a movement in that regard in terms of social and emotional.
And then somehow it seems over the last, 4 or 5 years, suddenly this idea of mindfulness has come forward. And as you say, at this event, there are almost 200 people. That would not have happened 5 years ago. So what do you think is the interest? Why is this happening?
Oh, it's a very good question. There's probably multiple things that have been emerging. I think there's one, certainly there is a large body of research supporting the idea of mindfulness-based practices with adults. There's mindfulness-based stress reduction that's been around for about 20 years plus, and really showing the benefits, both the health benefits and psychological benefits of people undergoing this mindfulness-based stress reduction for themselves. I think that's on the one hand. And then the other hand, there's been in the recent years really quite advances in neuroscience. And so there's a whole field of neuroscience, and there's people who are interested in looking at the benefits of doing mindfulness meditation on the brain and really showing some interesting, amazing results. And that really has been around, has emerged because of the technology and advances in the whole idea of brain imaging. But I also, I have to bring in another level, and I think people have really been concerned about children and youth, and really in our society. I'm amazed, I have to say, the fast-paced technology, well, I have to bring up technology. Well, and just the idea of, anywhere I go, I see people walking down the street doing their emails or reading their emails, and how much you see people out for lunch and having their Blackberries and so little going on. And I think
watching the children's baseball games, and they're looking at their Blackberries.
I know.
Not that I've ever done.
No. I won't go into that.
But we all do it. I think that's what you're saying, and the pace has picked up, and the children are picking up on it.
Well, and I think that the idea of that, what adults, we feel so pressed, and I think that we're seeing that something's got to give. And we have to bring it back to finding these ways, because I think we're feeling more and more intense pressure to be stressed, and I think the stress is rising, and that we have to find some antidote to help, so it's not going to have really terrible ramifications for our society. And I think many adults, I think mindfulness now has really become secularized. It's really become so popular. I mean, you go to any bookstore, and there's probably in any section you'll see there's all kinds of the mindfulness workbook, and I think so people are just really interested in how can we bring these benefits to children, because they really are our future.
So when you think about mindfulness with children, first of all, many people have an image of somebody sitting in a yogi position doing meditation, and that is what they consider to be mindfulness. When you think about mindfulness for children, what do you think of?
Well, I think it can take many forms, and I think first of all we should say how are we defining mindfulness? Because I think if you Google it, I think there's something like 13 million hits, something huge, you know. So we really have to make sure that when we're talking about mindfulness, you're right. The image automatically is someone sitting, as they say, sitting on a cushion, doing meditation for long periods of time. But if you go back to Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition, and he really is kind of one of the leaders in this sort of more popular secularized version of mindfulness, is that you see it's really paying attention in the present moment non-judgmentally. And you could think of all these other things that you could do that are mindful. You could go do mindful walking, mindful listening, and so there's many different ways to be mindful. And I think that now people are realizing with children that there's something about children that you could bring down this practice that isn't just about having them sit on a cushion and meditate for hours, but there's many activities that you could integrate into the classroom in being mindful.
And as you're saying that, it's occurring to me that, and I think you've already sort of said this, that at one point in time, mindfulness might have just been a natural state for children because they were for hours looking at a leaf or playing quietly by themselves, and because of the change of pace, we're needing to reintegrate it into their life. So what are some examples of what you've seen in schools that are successes in terms of doing this?
Well, I do want to first start, and I've said this out loud many times, I was very skeptical. I started out doing this research. Mark Greenberg brought me in to help evaluate a program that was happening in Vancouver. I'm a professor at University of British Columbia, and I do research on children's social and emotional development, and people were saying, oh, this mindfulness, and I had never really had experience with it. So in some ways, I had a good critical eye, you know, in devising a research study. But what was very fascinating, both collecting the quantitative data, but the anecdotal data, was that you know, I really was skeptical about the really young children, the kindergartners, the first graders. I thought, you know, are they really going to get this? And I won't go through the whole program, but there were times where they were listening to a sound, sitting still, focusing on their breath, and I said, I don't think they can do it. And what I saw quickly was that they almost were closer to it. They immediately took to it. Now, mind you, it all appeared of how the teacher approached me. The teacher had the setting, but they did seem like it was closer to them. So as you gave this example, you know, there is something about children really paying attention, looking at a leaf, and even just if you think of, what are those called, those paints, finger paints, you know, and feeling the feeling of the paints and really being immersed in the smells, that there is something about it, and helping teachers reintegrate these ideas of being in the present and using all of the lessons to say, okay, we're going to be doing this lesson, but what is that? How can we incorporate mindfulness into that?
And how were the children saying? Were they talking about how it felt to be doing that?
Yeah, so, you know, one thing, again, I'm going to keep on stressing the research, because I do have to say that on the one hand, I'm talking about it, but I'm a researcher, so the research is not yet there. We are just, the research is emerging. We're beginning some beginning studies. But one thing that's been so critical in the research is really capturing the children's voices and the teachers' voices, so not just having the quantitative numbers, but the qualitative things.
The stories.
The stories and what the children were saying in a more systematic level. But what we found is that children immediately were interested in it. They went, well, in fact, one of the things we collected, how many kids did you go, after doing this program, mindfulness education program it was called at the time, it's now called Mind Up, did you teach any of these skills that you learned in the curriculum to anyone else? And what we found was astounding, something like 70% of children went and took these skills to teach them. And it was interesting, they talk about their parents, like, oh, my parents were kind of getting like stressed out, they were kind of getting angry. I tell them, come on, let's do, you know, kind of calm down, you can stress, or their siblings saying, you know, and even friends, and said, oh, good, we can use this in friendships and stuff. So wow, yeah, so that was really quite amazing.
And what were the teachers saying about the effect it was having on the children, on the classroom, on themselves?
Well, they, you know, again, anecdotal, and we need more research, was that they were saying that they noticed really immediate changes in children, that the children were almost hungry for this idea that, because the Mind Up program has 3 times a day this daily listening, breathing practice, a mindful attention practice, and they found that that the children, you know, think about it, like you're at this hectic school and it's all stressed, and you're saying, okay, now we're going to just take a few minutes to be silent, to, sometimes turn off the lights, and they welcomed it. Like, it was something. So the teachers were really quite amazed that the children loved it so much. So really it fed into the teachers, because of course as a teacher you want the children to be engaged, and so they were able to really see, oh my goodness, the kids really like it. They're asking to do it. And then the teachers themselves said, I'm learning to be much more mindful. So and I have to bring up one of the issues. So some people, and this is depending on the program, because there's a number of different programs that are emerging, that really say you need your own mindfulness practice before you do it. And then there's other ones that say the teachers want so much to help the kids, they learn it and then they come on board. So again, the research really needs to know of how can we bring these together.
And it's interesting because one of the main foci, is that the plural of focus?
Yes,
in schools,
so. Yes.
is managing behavior. And there's so much focus on maybe discipline. But I'm wondering if this kind of approach, in fact, settles the class down so that the behavior issues disappear.
Yeah, they're sort of, well, it's so interesting because you really have to look at what is the rationale and the focus. Because, we have to be, so I'm going to talk first on the sort of more cautious side, then I'll talk on the happier side. On the cautious side, you don't want teachers to say, okay, here's just another one, I can get the kids to sit down and shut up. And as a behavioral control method, if that's the idea of it, rather without the understanding.
That was the intention of you doing it, right?
Right, the idea. So we do have to say, I'm going to do the chime, and now you have better sit up, and stuff. So, so really has to be looking at what the intention of these programs, and really how I got interested is because the research as well as the theory really show that once you're more at peace with yourself, that you can be more at peace with others, and that you're more likely to be compassionate and helpful to others, and so and also more joyful and less stressed. And so that is what some of the research is emerging, and what are some of the goals of these programs is not only to help you reduce your stress and to be more present, but the idea that once you're more present, once you're more open, you become more open to experiences and more in the present moment and aware of how other people are feeling and how you're feeling, and able to help.
Were there any surprises for you in the research? Because you said you started out skeptical in a way, and you've done some research now and watched children over the years. Anything for you that stands out?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and again, the research is just emerging, and it's so wonderful to be at the beginning of a field and really seeing it growing, and also realizing that there has to be much more connection in terms of how things are measured. I mean, that's in itself, what do we measure, what are the outcomes? But one of the things that in the one study that we did, I'll talk first about that and others, is the idea that it increased optimism. So that we not only found that children, according to teacher reports, became less aggressive and more attentive and had better social emotional competence, but the children themselves reported being more optimistic. And I want to say something about optimism, which is a very important personality trait, or a trait in the sense of people who are optimistic, who see the glass half full, who wear the rose-colored glasses, who are somewhat delusional, not only
in the best possible way.
Yes, of course. But optimism. This idea is that you're healthier. You have better relationships. You recover better from illness. So that I thought that was a very interesting one. And then some of the other research that's emerging is really showing among Trish Broderick and her research on learning to breathe is really finding, it reduces rumination or. And there's other studies also showing it increases executive functions. So we're finding, despite the variability among the different research studies and the populations on which they're being done, there is some consistency emerging in terms of the benefits of these types of programs, even though they're somewhat eclectic in the programs, that there does seem to be some emerging positive findings.
Is there enough in the research now to know what some of the key ingredients are? Because I could be listening to this and I might have some activity that I think is mindfulness, and I'm going to take it into the schools. So what are the criteria, or probably the magic ingredients, the key ingredients that make these programs successful?
I wish I had the answer for you. It's a million-dollar question, and I want to be very optimistic. I want people to go, we need to sort of move forward in the field, and we need to try out these new approaches, but we know so little, and we need the research. And I'm really calling upon a whole new generation of these graduate students and people who are interested in this to begin doing, really adding to the science, because we don't know the magic ingredients. And one thing is, we don't know, what does mindfulness look like? What are the best mindfulness practices for 5-year-olds versus 7-year-olds versus 9-year-olds, for different cultural groups, for different settings? Is yoga really good here? But this dance program for children who are in the present, is that really a mindfulness activity that's really appropriate for them? And what are the benefits? Like, what do we want as the outcomes? Certainly, kind of this, as everyone's saying at this conference, the neuroscience is kind of sexy. If we can kind of show the brain changes, it would be important. But we have to know what other kinds of things do you have. Some of the things mentioned at the conference is interpersonal awareness, not just of how we are in relationships. How does that
That's an
improve?
interesting idea. So this mindfulness isn't just about the person
Yes.
sitting alone quietly, but you and I can be mindful when we're talking to each other.
Exactly, and how that can, how people who do these mindfulness practices and do that kind of listening, that deep listening, which is a mindfulness activity, how does that improve those skills? But we just need more research. I just have to keep on saying that.
Well, and
like a
for there
broken
to be
record.
more research, there needs to be continued practice. And so how do we make sure this isn't just a passing fad? What do you know now? Any sense of sustainability? What would you say?
Well, certainly leadership is key. And I'm going to give a story of what happened in Vancouver, because that's kind of my experience. What happened is in 2004, really, this mindfulness education program was being developed by the Hahn Foundation, really about bringing children more joy and happiness. And we were able to then bring it into, the district had a focus on the promotion of social responsibility. And so what was really critical there is that the district had leadership at the administrative level. Lisa Bedrini, actually, who was the manager for social responsibility, I went to her. I had already had a relationship with the school district doing research on a number of different programs and had done lots of stuff, said, here's a program I think it's worth trying out and piloting. We did an information session for teachers who were going to be part of the research. But then, so you had the district leadership that was critical, that was supporting this. Teachers came in, but then what happened is it became a word of mouth thing. So frankly, it was very interesting. Teachers started telling other teachers about the program and what they were seeing and the benefits they were feeling with doing it, so that word of mouth. But then what was really critical is that you also had the support from the district saying, okay, we have this program, teachers really are wanting it, we have some research on it, let's keep on growing it. So you needed both the leadership and the buy-in. And then, we haven't even mentioned parents yet here. And I know how important that is how do you bring parents in there? And I have to say, almost weekly, I get an email from parents who are saying, I've heard about this program, I myself do mindfulness, how can I help bring my children in this? So, so the sustainability, it's interesting in the school system. I really believe besides the administrative level and the teacher buy-in, but we need to get the parents on board as well, because I think if it, again, it takes a village and we have to get everyone. And then it will be sustainable, if you have that buy-in.
And that parent part, I would think a big part of that is that it's secular. As you said earlier, this isn't a religious movement.
I think that is a really critical point, that doing these mindfulness attention training, it really is secularized with bringing it into regular practice. There's all sorts of benefits, health benefits, for doing these practices, and that we have to just get away from the idea that mindfulness is just meditation, and the idea that children, that we probably all of us have a certain degree of mindfulness, some people more so than others, and it's a trait that can be fostered and cultivated, so that we really, if we realize it's something we already have and it's something to be cultivated and it's something that will enhance our well-being and the well-being of our society by creating a more compassionate, caring society, then I don't see how you can argue with that.
So you started out as a skeptical scientist.
Oh, yeah.
And now 5 years later, what are your hopes for mindfulness for children?
Well, it's it's an interesting question. I really have so many more research questions that I want to answer. So, like right now, we want to know, for instance, it's very interesting with this Mind Up program where teachers aren't required to have their own mindfulness practice to be able to teach it to others. And actually, that's a whole idea of how do you go to scale with this. So what we're finding is that teachers get training in this program, begin doing it with their students, then they're interested in coming back and doing a mindfulness program for themselves. So it's kind of a, instead of, it's interesting because there's some teachers who might come into a mindfulness program for themselves who then go and are interested in bringing it to the students. And there's probably other pathways where some teachers get it for their students and then themselves want to do it. So I think we have to, I'd love to learn more about the combinations, and I really want to know if, I think the quantitative data and having the outcome data and showing those numbers, and that's really supportive for growing it in districts, and administrators need that data. But I think we really need to spend some more time about what does it look like in the classroom, and what's the experiences of the children and the teachers, and what happens when you grow it in a school. One other, well, might not be the last, but one other component I want to say is sustainability. And I talked about the leadership, but we also found that teachers need to be in a group with themselves, something like a professional learning community. When we first started the Mind Up program, or the mindfulness education, our requirement was that you can come to the training and bring another teacher from your school, so that they have each other. And I think that that's something we really have to think about. What are those conditions in which you can really have it last? And teachers really need to be connected to each other.
So a lot of answers and a lot more questions.
Yes.
And so I think this is probably a conversation to be continued.
Yes.
But for now, thank you very much,
Great,
Dr.
thanks,
Kimberly
Maria.
Schonert-Reichel.